Hello and welcome, everyone. This is the GraphQL Hangout. This is GraphQL Hangout number 51. And I believe this is the first one for this year. So we are back. We are back in action once again. And we thought what we'll do based off of our discussions that we had all of last year and perhaps the year before, we thought we'll spend some time looking at how you can get started with GraphQL, how you can build APIs, how you can build them better, how you can manage them, how you can secure them, how you can expose them. So we'll be looking to do this perhaps as a part of a series on an ongoing basis. We're going to be starting things off with Apollo and Tyk today. So with that, thank you so much for joining me. I am Budha. I'm product evangelist here at Tyk, and I'll be joining you and guiding you through this entire hands-on workshop over the next 90-ish minutes. And like I was mentioning beforehand, if you've got questions at any point of time, then feel free to post that. I've got Agatha, who is our senior product manager of all things GraphQL at Tyk. I think she's going to be here helping me out, answering some of those questions if you have them. There will be breaks in the middle. This is going to be broken into 4 different parts and segments. So at the end of each one of those, there'll be a couple of minutes break before we jump onto the next one. So if you've got questions pertaining to a specific section, then feel free to pose those to me as well. I'm going to be working across 2 different screens, so don't mind me looking away from the camera for a little while, but the idea is just to make life a little bit easier for me to manage across those two screens. So I'm going to quickly share my screen right now, and let me know if you can see what I'm sharing.
And I just wanted to add, if you have questions about GraphQL and Tyk beyond the scope of the GraphQL Hangouts subject, feel free to write them in the chat as well. I'm there paying attention, so yeah. Awesome.
All right, yeah, 100%. I think it's a great opportunity for us to just interact and get to know each other, plus to ask any of your questions right now, or even later if you want to. That is also perfectly fine. So with that, without further ado, I'm hoping you can see my screen, which says GraphQL Hangout 51, building GraphQL APIs the easy way with Apollo and Tyk. And I think you'll see what I mean by that. I'm also looking at building production-ready GraphQL APIs, because I think when we think about building APIs, a lot of times, whether that's REST or GraphQL, a lot of times we try to put a whole lot of emphasis on the development and design side of things, which you should absolutely do. But equally, it is important to know what it takes to build production-ready APIs. And the buck does not stop when your first hello world comes in or the first API request comes in. That request, you need to ensure that the request is secure. You need to ensure that you've got the right policies, governances, external analytics and monitoring, things like that, essentially the more administrative side of things, but things that are essential for making your APIs production ready. The way you expose your APIs for consumption externally, all of these things matter when you're thinking about building out an application, building out a product, building out a business on top based off of those APIs and products. So hopefully today's workshop, today's Hangout is going to be enlightening for you to at least get you started. If you already know how to build these, then perhaps you'll find something new, you'll learn something new, or you'll be able to share something with the folks who are just about getting started. And me and Agatha are both always happy to learn new things ourselves. So with that, I'm going to be heading on to the next slide. So I think I've done my introduction. I'm going to be skipping over that. So what do we have in store for you today? A quick introduction into the world of GraphQL. It's going to be a short intro to some of the key elements, some of the key components, some of the reasons why GraphQL exists, and things that will hopefully help us get started quickly when we go into the hands-on demo segment section of things, which is where the next part comes in. So the next part is about building out a GraphQL endpoint. We're going to be using Apollo to do that. We're going to be using a very simple user to-do list that we're going to be building, a simple API that enables you to do that. Once again, there are a couple of parts associated to this as well, where we will be creating a list of users, and then we are going to be adding some to-do list items that they need to either complete or have already completed to their own triumph. So that's what we're going to be doing. Very, very straightforward, simple enough. We are going to be exploring queries, resolvers. We'll be exploring one mutation. We are not going to delve in too deep into the world of mutations right now, because ideally mutations work better when we are working with persisted data sources or databases. We are not really going into that world today. Once we've done that, we're going to be taking that GraphQL API to secure that endpoint. We're going to be securing the GraphQL endpoint that we have built using Tyk's API management platform. And we'll dive into the world of rate limits. We'll dive into the world of query depth limiting. We'll dive into the world of field-based permissions, and we'll see how easy and simple that is, but equally how important that is, because it solves really, really key challenges that you will have if you are building production-ready GraphQL APIs. So definitely keep that in mind. That is going to be our next segment. And the final segment is more of a bonus at this point of time. We'll see how we're doing with time, but it is a very exciting part that I think I'm very keen on showcasing, where we spoke about data sources. And like I said, today we are going to be, for the most part, using non-persistent data source locally available. But equally, a major use case when it comes to GraphQL, or a major conversation, is around, I already have REST APIs. What do I do? How do I actually build a GraphQL API based off of that? And I think the traditional way of doing that would be to create a middleware. And you can do some of that stuff with Apollo, and I've done that already. I tried and tested that. But equally, what we are offering here is the universal data graph that will enable you to actually take the complexity out of that translation, but not just stop at that translation in a no-code manner where you're just configuring things, but it also enables combining different data sources together, combining different REST endpoints together into a single unified data graph exposed as a GraphQL API. And we'll see how simple and straightforward all of that really is using the universal data graph. You don't really have to write your own middleware. You don't have to manage it. You don't have to maintain it. And again, it takes a really, really short amount of time compared to what you might have to do if you were using something else to accomplish that. So with that little bit of agenda for today, let's head on over to a quick introduction to GraphQL. I'm going to really rush through all of this because for the most part, if you're here, you probably already know some of this stuff. So GraphQL is a query language for your APIs. It essentially enables you to build, write queries, dictate the shape of those queries, and retrieve information specifically to your needs. And it was built with omni-channel consumption in mind. So based on the requirements of your different platforms, based on the requirements of your different applications across those platforms, you can request exactly what you need for those specific purposes and platforms. So that is the reason why GraphQL started and came into existence. And of course, things are evolving as we're going along. There are new things that are coming up that are enabling and strengthening some of the stuff. But equally, I feel like some of the things are getting diluted because of some of the noise that is being created in the industry. But personal opinions aside, quick history of things. It's been a while that it's been around. I think officially, I would say publicly released in 2015. So we are at about the 8-year mark, getting close to that 10-year mark. And again, like I said, things have changed. It was built for omni-channel products. And we do have really strong use cases in the industry, but equally people have found out where you should be using, where you could be using GraphQL, but equally where perhaps GraphQL is not the right solution for you. And again, that's going to be the case with any API style that you are thinking about or considering. I think there's been a bit of a disservice, I feel, with the entire conversation of GraphQL taking over REST and that being the future of APIs and API styles. I don't particularly believe that. I don't believe that is actually accurate at all. And it does disservice to both REST and GraphQL, which both of whom have a space, both of which has a place in today's digital landscape full of APIs in today's API ecosystem. And equally playing a part would be something like gRPC, where again, it has its own place, it has its own benefits, its own pros, its own cons, and its own use cases. So with that in mind, let's look at, obviously we've talked about the REST versus GraphQL debate a little bit, but ultimately what I want you to take away from it, I don't want to get into the debate today, but what you want to know or what you need to understand is what your use case is and what your priorities are. What kind of resources that you have available to you, what kind of expertise that you have available to you, what kind of scale that you're working at, what kind of problems are you really solving. So really get a good understanding of the problem that you are trying to solve, trying to get a solution to. And I think that's where you can make a choice of whether which API style is going to be solving that. In some cases, either or works. I think for the similar use cases, perhaps the either or side of things work. In some cases, it might be a combination of both that you need as part of your API stack. And I think that's perfectly okay. There is no necessarily wrong answer here. You could do a great job with REST. You could still do a great job with GraphQL if you've got the right design, the right workflows, the right API management as part of your stack. But equally, you could screw things up as well if you are designing things badly, if you're doing things which again is going to mess things up on your end. If you're not thinking about security, if you're not thinking about designing APIs in a way that that is modular in nature, perhaps. I think there is no solution to bad design, is what I always maintain. So you can equally screw up GraphQL as much as you could screw up REST. There are, again, pros and cons to each one of them. Know and understand your use case and priorities to make an informed decision. Don't get caught up in the hype of the market. Do not get caught up with essentially articles that scream out that GraphQL is the end of REST, because take it from me, it is not. At least it is not today. Whether it's going to be in the future or not, I do not know. But the way I see it, it is going to be a coexistence, harmonious story, as opposed to winner take all. But that's my opinion. Quick one onto the basic GraphQL concepts, and I think this is where the fun bit starts. And I thought maybe I'll go into slide-based definitions a little bit more, but instead I thought, why not show you what a GraphQL schema looks like? So let's start off with what a schema is. A schema essentially is a blueprint of your GraphQL API. It tells you about what is available, what is accessible, what kind of fields, what kind of types that are available, what kind of objects that are available to you, and what you can query. So I've obviously mentioned a couple of things right there, but what you need to know about schemas is that it's a blueprint of your GraphQL API. It tells you what you can do with your GraphQL API. Now, within that, there are a few different components. Now, if you think about any API that exists, there are a couple of things that you would want that API to accomplish. So typically, when we think about APIs, we think about CRUD. It's essentially your create, read, update, and delete. You've got something similar here in GraphQL as well. So when we think about reading or retrieval of information, that's where we talk about GraphQL queries. So queries essentially enable you to retrieve specific pieces of information, whether that's filtered by certain things or just retrieving whole sets of data. That's completely up to you. But retrieval of information, reading of information is enabled through queries in GraphQL, and that's what you see over here. A typical query would, again, have sort of a field here, which is what you're going to be requesting information based off of, and then there's going to be a response type, which you see on the other side. If you see square brackets, now response types can be of two types again. There could be what you could call the scalar types, which are the simple literal types, which you would see over, I think if you go down to these objects. So the hierarchy of things over here within the queries is you've got an object, which is essentially a definition of what a type is all about, where here we've got two examples of that. We've got users, we've got to-dos. The users are essentially, you've got, it gives you information about a particular user. So that's your user type, an object of users with ID, name, username, and emails. And as you can see, there is strings and ints, and these are essentially what they are. These are your scalar types or literal types, essentially provided to you through GraphQL. So integers, strings, those kind of things. But you can also compose that into objects. So these are the objects that can be called upon as well as a response type. And that's what you see here in the query level, where if you're requesting information about a user, you can get back a particular user if that's what you're looking for, or you can get back an array of users, each of whom will have these different fields associated with them. So array of users essentially denoted by those square brackets that you see. If you see those, that's what it does. The exclamation mark is essentially what you say non-nullable. That means that there needs to be a value for this. So when you are either working with it, if you're making a request based off it, you need to have this particular value set for you. These are important. These are non-nullable values, essentially. Now, beyond the retrieval of information and reading of information, there is obviously the manipulation of data that is typically done through creation, updates, and deletion. That's in GraphQL that is handled through mutations. As the name suggests, mutations essentially mutates the data. It essentially changes the data, manipulates the data. That could be in the form of, adding, in this case, it's adding a new user. It could also be deleting an existing user or updating an existing user as well. Like I said in the beginning, Typically, mutations work better with persistent data sources, which we are not going to be working with today, but I will give you a simple example of how you might be able to add a new user to your to the existing data source that we're going to be working with. So just to give you a sense of what mutations look like and what resolvers look like, which is another terminology that I just introduced. So with all of these happening in your schema and what you're exposing, behind the scenes, and we'll see that once we start the demo, behind the scenes, the way your request is processed and what response corresponds to your request is handled by something called a resolver. A resolver is basically a function. It's a function that takes in your request and processes it, computes it, and gives you the necessary response associated with it. If it is a query, it's going to be a list of information that you're requesting. If it's a mutation, then in some cases it might be giving you what the status of that request is. So if you're adding a user, it might either say that, yes, I've added a user, everything is fine, or it could equally just give you back the entire new list of user set that you might want to consider based off of the added values that you've seen. So I think that's kind of the gist of it. I think there are definitely a lot more things to go into. There are directives that you can go into. There's a whole world of federation left to explore, which we are not going into today. I think that's probably better left for its own dedicated session at sometime in the future. For now, I think for us to get started, these should be sufficient for us to move along. And I think if there are new definitions or new terminologies that as we encounter them, I'll be more than happy to talk through them. Or if you're confused about any of these terminologies, definitely shoot me a question inside your in the Q&A section, and I will address those. All right. With that, I think let me see what we have next. So quickly, Apollo GraphQL, in case you are not familiar with it, which probably you are at this stage, because it is one of the most popular platforms for building your GraphQL APIs. It is a GraphQL developer platform. What it enables you, like I said, is building out your designing, developing GraphQL API and federating GraphQL APIs as well, if that's something that you're interested in. Once again, we'll probably keep that for another day, another time. It is a thing of its own, but we'll explore that later. But today, what we're going to be using Apollo GraphQL is we are going to be using it to build our GraphQL endpoints. A little bit about Tyk. So Tyk is a cloud-native API management platform. It is powered by an open source API gateway that's capable of handling your REST, GraphQL, gRPC APIs, as well as SOAP APIs as well, if you've got those still. But specific to GraphQL, we've got support for existing GraphQL APIs if you've got those, and to use those, take those existing GraphQL APIs and add security, add specific configuration, monitoring, analytics, exposing that for external consumption. All of that stuff is readily available for you to do that if you've got existing GraphQL APIs. But equally, you have universal data graph, which is, like I said previously, if you are looking to build GraphQL APIs using existing data sources, specifically here, we're talking about REST. And as of now, we've got support for Kafka as well, which again is probably a future episode that's going to be coming up. But what you need to know right now is we're able to combine REST API endpoints and build out GraphQL APIs on top of it. Whether that's a single REST endpoint or multiple endpoints, you can combine them all and expose that in a low-code manner. And we'll see how easy that is as we go along. Moving on, so what we are building today, really quickly, this is kind of what we are going to be looking to build. We are going to have a user type, and we are going to have a to-do type. The user type will have an ID, a name, and email, simple enough, and it will have a list of to-dos. That to-do will relate to the to-do object, which will have its own ID, title, completed status, so to speak, as well as a user ID that it's going to be associated with when it comes to the user itself. So that's essentially sort of the shape of what we're going to be building today, and we'll see progressively how we approach that. And then how we are going to be building it is, like I said, we're going to be using Apollo GraphQL. What you will need as a bit of a prerequisite, ideally, is you'll need Node npm being installed. Ideally, that should be there. And just a word of warning there, I think I faced a little bit of challenge working with my new laptop, which is the M1 MacBook Pro. With these new Apple chips, I think there are a couple of things that you need to do extra. So if you do get stuck a little bit in the installation process of Node, do look for a quick solution. I think I found the solution really easily on Stack Overflow, but there is a solution that is needed. It doesn't seem to work out of the box, or maybe I don't know if that's just me, but given that there is an entire thread on Stack Overflow, I think there are a few people struggling with it. So if you're on the M1 Pro new Apple chips, it might be worth having a look there. You'll need a terminal to run your commands. I'm also going to be using a code editor ID. I'm going to be using Visual Studio Code, but again, feel free to use whatever you like for your own development environment. Okay, that's a lot of talk. We've gone through about 20 minutes already, so let's go ahead and start building our APIs. I'm going to be quickly stop sharing. This is kind of the end of our stage one, so to speak, the quick introduction that we had. And curious, I'm going to stop really quickly to see if we've got any questions. Let's move on to this next step. So now the next step is going to be us building our GraphQL API. So let me just quickly bring up my IDE as well as my terminal window. I'm going to call this the Hangout demo. Let's put in a dash there. Hangout demo. I'm going to go into this quickly. Here we go. It's completely empty for the time being. And what we will do is let's get on with our setup. We are going to initialize our node project. I'm going to say yes. And this is again assuming I've already got my npm and node set up here, so that's why it's easy enough for me to do this. I'm going to go ahead and create that. What it's going to do is essentially it's going to be creating a package.json file, which again is going to be sort of a directive of when we're going to be starting the server, what to do at that point of time. So you can see there are a couple of things that are here. We'll explore a few of these a little bit later on. We're going to be changing a couple of things as we go along. But for now, I'm going to be looking to install my dependencies. I think the first dependency that I'm going to be, so there are a couple of them, actually 3 of them that we are going to be looking to do. First is we want GraphQL. We want the GraphQL library for managing and handling things, of course. Then we're going to be looking at the Apollo server. And then finally, we are going to be looking at NodeMon. And again, I don't know if the pronunciation of that is NodeMon or NodeDemon. I don't know. Unfortunately, I haven't bothered to look at it. I have been calling it NodeMon, so it is NodeMon for me. But let's start that. Let's do an npm install Apollo server, GraphQL, and basically the idea here with NodeMon is that it enables you to hot reload your servers. So otherwise, what you would end up doing is every time you're making a change to your code, you'll have to restart your server, stop, which again is not very efficient. So with this, it essentially hot reloads your server every time you're making a particular change, which again, it's a massive time saver. I would definitely recommend it if you're not using it already. And it goes beyond just this project. You can use it for any project that you want. So a little bit of a tip there for you. So with that, this is going to start installing my dependencies as we go along. Now, if you look at the the Apollo GraphQL doc site, they do recommend using TypeScript for doing this. For today's, again, simplicity's sake, and with my own background in JavaScript, I'm just going to be sticking to JavaScript and get started there. All done. It looks like we've got everything sorted. All packages done. And right, so we're all ready to go. We've got an empty folder for the time being. But what we want to do perhaps right now is I'm going to see if I can switch over to my IDE. So, okay, hopefully you can see my Visual Studio at this point of time. And basically what I've done is I've opened up the folder that we just created. On this screen, we've got our node modules, we've got our package.json here. And what I want to do next is I'm going to be creating a new index.js file. And again, if you want, you can always use the terminal right here. So if I want, I can just create that straight away. Bottom. So I've got an index.js. This is going to be our entry point into everything that we do today. So we can obviously separate things into different folders and different files. If we wanted to, we can have the resolvers separately. We can have our data sources separately. But again, for the sake of simplicity, we're going to keep things within this index.js file. The next thing that we want to do is, as part of our setup process, is going to be updating our package.json. So as I said, the index.js file is going to be what's going to be the entry point into your when the server starts. That is what we are going to be loading up. So we want to see if I can make this a little bit bigger. There you go. So what we want to do here is we're going to be changing, we're going to be adding a script where we're going to be saying start. And we are going to say node_mon, oopsie, node_mon index.js. So what this is going to do is when we start the server using something called npm space start, when we start the server, it is going to give us, it's going to go straight into index.js and it's going to start running things, whatever is in there, which we're going to be doing shortly. The other thing that I want to add here is going to be a type field. And what that is going to do, type module. And this essentially enables you to have your ES modules or ECMAScript modules here. And one of the key modules around that is going to be your await calls, which we'll see when we are creating, if we're building out the server instances, you need to have that. And also if you're working with asynchronous API calls, you do need to have this in your arsenal. So this is part of your overall setup script, and even anything that you're using ES6 and above, any kind of calls that you're making based off of those, any functions, any features, you need to have this in place for those to work. Even simple things like import functions in the top, you need to have this in place. So with that, that ends our package.json setup, as well as our overall setup with the dependencies and everything. We are now ready to go into our index.js to start creating our GraphQL schema, or well, in our case, creating our overall API. Now, there's going to be a couple of steps to do this. Once again, I'm going to quickly see if there's any questions, anything. Nope, don't see any, which is great. Hopefully that means that you're following along and not lost. If you are, please again stop me. I'm happy to explain things. Right. So within this, there will be a couple of things that we want to look into. We need to import our libraries. I think that's step one. We are going to be looking to create our type definitions. We will like to add data sources. And again, data sources can probably come in a little bit earlier on if you want to step ahead. We need to write our resolvers. Then we need to create our Apollo server. Define our, create our let's say create an instance of server, and then we're going to be writing our query. So, which is not part of this file, so I'm not going to put this over here. So this is essentially the step. This is kind of like the 5-step process for you to what we're going to be following in order to create our GraphQL API. So with that, let's start off with our import. Let's do our import of libraries. We have a couple of them to do. So let's get started. We've got import Apollo server. Apollo server. It's good. We're going to be looking at import Apollo server from Apollo/server. I think that's good. We've got this going. Next, we go into importing our start standalone server. Let me see if I've got the spelling right. Yeah, looks good. From Apollo server /standalone. There we go. So that's essentially the imports, the two imports that we need. We need the Apollo server here, and we're going to be using the standalone server in this case, which is what we need for this demonstration. So imports are complete. I'm going to hit save for now, then move right along to our first type definitions. So type definitions, essentially, this is building out our schema. This is essentially creating our first GraphQL schema. I'm going to keep it very simple because I want to get to that hello world as quickly as possible. So with that, I'm going to be defining const type def, not type def, type def. I'm going to add the single tick. I think it's backtick, if I'm not wrong. So we're using the backticks here. I can get started with, say, GraphQL, hash GraphQL. Again, the reason for doing something like this is if your IDE has got code highlighting that is specific to GraphQL, then adding the hash GraphQL at the top just gives you gives it an indication to do something with it. Now, your IDE may not be relevant for your IDE, may not have a way to handle it, but if it does, then this is just useful to have. Next up, let's go with our first query, actually. So I'm going to be doing a very simple query, which is, I'm going to say type query. And within this, I'm going to say hello. And the return type of this is going to be a string. So what it's going to do is I'm going to be making a call, a query to our GraphQL server with hello as my request. It's going to give me back something. So, and what that something is going to be is what we'll be describing or defining in our resolvers. I'm going to skip over the data source for the time being because I think for this, let's keep things simple as much as possible. We will come back to that in the next step. But for now, I'm going to be writing out my first resolver. So in order to do that, I am going to follow similar steps. Let's say const resolvers. I think I've got that spelling right. Const resolvers, and I'm going to start this here. Now within resolvers, I'm going to be looking at query because it's happening at that query level, which is the root level that we are starting off with. We will explore how you can go a little bit deeper with specific field resolutions, but that's later on. But for now, let's start off with this. And here I've got my hello, which is the request. And what I'm going to do is my function is essentially going to return hello world. So hopefully that's a simple enough resolver, hopefully simple to understand. I'll be making a request with hello, and it's going to give me back a response, hello world. So that is our first resolver. Hopefully that is all in order. Now, what we want to do is we want to create an instance of our Apollo server and actually start that server. Let's get things moving. So there are two steps here. One is we need to, let's go over, create a Apollo server instance. Server. And this actually takes two. I think I've got this right? Type defs, yes. It takes two parameters. One is the schema definition that we did, which is the schema, the type defs, and your resolvers associated with them. So we have our resolvers. So that is your initial constructor for the Apollo server. And then finally, we are going to be passing this server instance. Maybe using a wait. And we're going to be specifying which port we want to be listening on or running the server on. I've chosen 4001 here, but you can equally choose something else if you wanted to. And I think that is primarily it. That's all right. And I want to put in a message to say the server is ready at hopefully that is accurate, right? Okay, no, I think that is about it. I think I'm going to be saving this and I'm going to have a quick look at it. But the idea is created our first schema. We've got our resolver. We've created our instance of the server itself. And basically, what's happening over here, it's actually it's pulling triple duty at this stage, where we're actually going to be creating an Express app based off of this. We're going to be installing the Apollo server instance as a middleware, and we're going to be preparing the app to handle any incoming requests on that port 4001. So with that, let me see if I can go here and write npm start. And there you have it. I think the server is running now. So let me see if I can, excuse me. I can share, I think I'm sharing my desktop already. So if I go back here and hit HTTP, localhost 4001, hopefully it will give me this. So basically, it's given me the Apollo version of the playground. I think you might be familiar with the graphical playground as well. There's sort of Apollo's version of that playground as well. It's got a couple of additional things to go with it. But really what we want to look at here is on the left-hand side. I'm going to see if I can make it a little bit bigger. On the left-hand side, you've got your hello field. If you go back to the root, you'll see under documentation, you've got query, you've got your hello string, and we are going to write an example query right now. So we can give it a name if you want to. If you're not familiar with this, again, you can omit this altogether, or you can give your query a specific name. It is important if you're going to be running similar styles of queries over and over again, which you can do. You don't have to restrict yourself to just one. So hopefully, when we call hello, we'll see the response on the right-hand side, which will come back as hello world. So that's a success so far. So well done, everyone who's been following along. So far, we've set up a GraphQL, the Apollo server, to handle our incoming requests, handle the queries that are coming in, and giving us a response based off of that. So of course, this is an API of itself, but we don't want to stop here. It'll be a bit of an anticlimax if we just stopped right now. So let's extend this a little bit more. Let's look at things. Let's look at a couple more slightly more complex things as we go along. Remember, as we spoke about previously, where we skipped over the part about data sources, let's bring that back. Let's create a bit of a data source here. And once again, like I said, it's going to be a locally hosted data source. It's essentially an array of objects that we're going to be working with. You know, if this is equally possible to work with. If you've got database connections to make, if you've got, you know, even REST APIs, if you've got those, it's slightly tricky to handle it, but it is possible to handle those. So different data sources you are capable of handling different data sources to power your GraphQL API as well if you wanted to. But for today, again, we're going to be keeping things simple. We'll explore some of that in future sessions as we go along. So with that being said, let me create really quickly. I'm going to actually just copy paste this one because I've created sort of a user type already. So if you look at it here, we've got an array of users. I've only created 2 users right now. We've got 2 users with ID, name, and email. There is Budha, there is James, and you know, we are going to be working a little bit with these users. We'll add things as we go along, but the idea is this is going to be our main data source for the time being. So with that, let's change our query a little bit. I think we'll move past our hello and get users. So the idea here is we want to get back all of the list of users that we have over here. So essentially the entire array of objects that we see here. We've got 2 users. We want those back as part of our response. So let's see how that is possible. So first of all, the return type of this is going to be an array. So if you remember, we spoke about it. It's going to be those square brackets, and the type itself is going to be a user type, which we will define now. So it's not just a string. It's an object that we're going to be looking to get back. It's got its own fields, so to speak. So in order to do that, let us define a type. we're going to be defining type user. And this user will have an ID of type int. You can use, if you want, you can definitely use ID as well. There is a data type ID that is available as part of GraphQL, but I found it to be a little bit inconsistent in certain cases. So I'm just sticking to int. It's a little bit more better defined than an ID, because ID can sometimes be ambiguously construed as either integer or as string sometimes. I've had some challenges, but feel free to use it if you want to. If it works for you, that's perfectly fine. But for this case, again, I'm going to be using the int. There's going to be a name, if I can spell it correctly, type string, and email. So that's my user type. So when I'm sending a request for, when I'm querying the get users, when I'm querying get users, I'm going to be getting back a list of users that will be pertaining to this shape of data. This is essentially going to be giving me ID, name, email. I can remove it if I want to. If I don't want specific things to be made available, even if it's part of your data source, you can do that. You can make it unavailable for, all of your users if you want to. But we'll see a smarter way of doing that as we move along to the API management side of things, where we look into field-based permissions and how you can do that. But for now, let's look at the entirety of the fields being made available. So that is step one. Obviously, we had the data source defined now. We've put that as part of our type definition, as part of our schema. We want to move on now to resolve this. Now we want to wait for this to be handled, for this to be managed. So let's look at what happens when we encounter get users. So when we encounter get users, we need to essentially take that request and return all of the users that we have on our list. So fairly straightforward for the time being. We are going to be responding with all of our users. And I think that is going to be the gist of it. I think if you do get users, this is going to be it. As you can see, it's hot. The server is getting hot reloaded, which should mean that if I go back here, I will see that there is a new query that is now made available within my queries. I've got my get users. I'm going to disable my hello string, and I'm going to say get users. Within this, I want my ID, name, and email. And hopefully, if everything goes well, then I'll be able to see this information for all of our users that we have here. So and there you go. We've got our two users on the right away. Simple enough to retrieve all of that information and making that possible. So easy enough queries, working with data. And again, if you're connected to a data source, it's going to work in a similar way, slightly, perhaps a little bit, a couple of more steps to it. But essentially, this is how you're going to be doing it. There is going to be the schema definition, type that is associated with the return of the data that you're looking at, the shape of that data that is governed by type user, and the resolver that is going to be handling the request. Then moving along, let's see if we can go a step further. So right now is returning all of our users. What if we wanted to retrieve a user based off of its ID? Just one single user based off its unique ID. So let's see what we can do there. We can go into a type definition again, and under query, now we're going to be adding get user by ID, or let's just say get user. Instead of get users, it's just user. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to be adding a parameter, which is my ID. That's going to be integer, which is important. And what it's going to be returning back in this time is going to be a user. It is not going to be an array anymore. I'm just expecting one specific user, and that's what we are going to be getting. So with that, let's move along to creating our resolver in this case. And now there'll be a couple of things that you do need to focus on. So previously, we did not have any parameters or any incoming thing that we had to process or work with. Any data or information that we needed to process, we had access to all of our users, and we just used that and returned that. But now things are going to be changing, because now we need to work through that. We have arguments that come in, so we need to define how to retrieve that argument. So there is sort of a syntax that if you go to the Apollo docs, there are 4 different parameters that you can add here when you're writing out your resolver function. We are probably not going to go through all of them because I think we care about the first two. The first one we are going to be skipping over for now, but you still need it. But it is the parent parameter, and what it does is it gives you access to the parent fields. So which we'll see when we start looking at nested fields in the next segment. But for now, I think just for you to know what it is, it's not going to be relevant for this particular part. What is going to be relevant here is going to be the arguments parameter. So this is where if you're sending out any argument as part of your request, this is what will retrieve that and make it available to this resolver. So let's look at that. So we've got that available now. And what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be creating that function here. And I'm going to say return users.find. Familiar with this, you probably know what it's going to do. I'm going to say user. Maybe I don't need, maybe I don't, okay, fine. Let's keep it. I don't think I need that extra bracket, but okay, user ID. I'm going to be adding my logic here. args.id. So essentially what it's going to do is it's going to be returning the user that matches the user ID with the argument ID that is put as part of the request. So hopefully this is fairly straightforward. If you're familiar with JavaScript, it's pretty straightforward way to create your functions and retrieving information. So hopefully I've got that right. Now I'm going to hit save, head back out. And then I can see if I go back to my queries under documentation that now I've got my get user. So get user over here, I've got my ID that I need. I'm going to be defining what I want to get back, the name. And I can change the shape if I want. I don't have to do ID email, ID name and email. I can do name, email, ID if I wanted to. And you can see you can set variables at the bottom as well. So you can add the ID directly if you wanted to, but equally this just gives you a little bit more flexibility if you just define that as variable. So over here, get user ID, I'm just going to say 1. I want the first user to be retrieved, and I'm going to get back my first user only. And just to show that I'm not cheating here and it's not hard code or anything, I'm going to be doing my second user and I get back James here as well. So that is our second query, second resolver, making it available, making it possible to not just get a whole list of users, but also filtering it out based off of a single user based off of IDs. So with that, I think that concludes our second step over here. We've got get user by ID. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to be introducing a second data source of sorts. And when I say data source, okay, maybe not a data source, but I'm going to be adding another data type, which is your to-do list. Now, so far, we've been working with just the user and we've been at that specific level. What we now are going to be looking at is creating and embedding sort of an object within our user itself. So essentially a nested field, so to speak, which has its own object type defined separately. So how do we do that? Let's go back here. I'm going to be starting off with the definition of the data source again. So I've got my const users. I'm going to copy paste this one just for simplicity and time. I'm going to be adding the second data source here, which is the const to-dos. So just to have a quick look here, we've got a user ID. So the associated to-do is going to be associated with a particular user. It's most likely not going to be a standalone. So in this case, they are all associated with a particular user. So the user ID is going to be that connector there. We've got the ID of the to-do item itself, which is a unique identifier. The title of what we're going to be doing, user ID 1, which is Budha, which is me. I'm going to be preparing for my GraphQL demo. I'm also going to be looking to call my parents, one of which I have completed. The other one is in progress, so by the looks of it. So the completed one is the status of it. It is a Boolean field, as you will see, will define. Then there is one for user type 2, which is for James. So that is our data source definition that's completed now. The next step here is going to be, again, go back. So if you think about it, it's always this 3-step process. So there is the data that you want connected to. So this could be, as you see the data source here, it could be something else. And equally, it could, and then the step 2 of this is creating the type definitions or adding it to the schema itself, and then finally writing the resolver and making it available. So 3-step process essentially to make it all happen. So I'm going to start off with actually creating a brand new type called to-do. And this to-do, if you remember the shape of our to-dos is, we have our, I'm going to start off with ID actually. I'm going to be starting off with ID, which is important. I'm also going to have my user ID, also of type int, also important in this case. Or maybe it isn't actually. Let's not make it non-nullable. That's okay. We want to have our title, which is string. Then we want to have our completed, essentially a status. Correct. I think about that spelled right. Correct. And this is going to be a Boolean. Now, what we want to do is obviously we're not going to be querying the to-do list directly. You can actually have a list of to-dos if you wanted to, and in order to do that, perhaps as a side, as a homework, if you're trying this out yourself, then see if you can create a query that lists out all of these to-dos, and maybe then figure out how you can filter that by a user ID, or filter that by an ID, or filter that by a status if you wanted to. So that's homework for you if you wanted to try it out yourself. But what we're going to be doing today is we're actually going to be associating this to-do list with a particular user. So the flow of it is going to be when you are requesting or querying a particular user, then you have the ability as part of that response to get back the to-do list of that user directly, as opposed to doing that completely separately. So in order to do that, we are going to be embedding this inside the user object. I'm going to call it to-dos. And it's going to be a list of to-dos most likely. So this is going to be a list of to-do objects. So that is my schema definitions here. Again, I've defined it. Now I need to write the resolver to handle it. So let's go over, keeping an eye out on time. We're about reaching the hour mark. Hopefully everyone is still with me and I haven't lost my audience entirely. So thank you so much for sticking around. But okay, on to the fun stuff. Really, this is exciting stuff that we're working on. On to the next bit, where now, so far, again, we've been working on the query level. So resolvers have always had this query over here, and we've been working with that. Right now, we are going to be stepping outside of the query, and we're going to be going into the user object. So the way you really think about these they're essentially described as part of objects right now. So effectively, query in itself is the root object. So you start there and you start creating your resolvers for each component inside it. But equally, if you've got these sort of nested or chained resolvers that are necessary, then you follow a similar pattern. You start off with the object again, that is the parent object. So here, the parent object is going to be user. So I'm going to be going in here. And what I will do is, let's see. I need to resolve my to-dos. So let's see if I can do to-dos. What this will do, should ideally do, is it will return. Now, remember, we spoke about when we are defining a resolver, there is the parent function that we did not use last time. We definitely want to use it here. So we've got our parent. We don't really need an argument in this case because it's not relevant, because arguments typically work at the top level. And unless you're pushing that down, the way the parents, the child within an object get access to any information that is passed along is going to be through your parent. So the parent parameter is what's going to give us access to that information. So with that, let's go ahead. And what I want to do here is, once again, I'm going to be returning my to-dos, not find. Or maybe I think it might be better to do a to-dos.filter, perhaps. I think that might be better. I'm trying to wonder which is more efficient way of doing it. I think find probably returns just the one. Let's say if I do a filter here. Filter my to-do item. And what I should be getting. sorry, missed my mouse. What should happen is it is going to check for my user, sorry, my to-do dot user ID, map that against my parent dot, well, ID, I believe, is what we're going to be getting. What did we define here? I think it's parent.id, parent.id. Yeah, that is it, parent.id, because the object, the user object has ID here. It does not have user ID. So I think that should be sufficient if I'm not wrong. Let's just start, see if this is going to work. So server starts, so obviously no bugs there, so to speak. I'm heading back out now onto my queries. Obviously not a lot changes here because we are still going to be requesting access to the user, but you will see now I've got a to-do list that I can add to. So I'm going to be looking at my title and completed status here. So let's see, hopefully everything is fine and it gives me, there you go. I'm currently using the user number 2, and this is the only associated task that he has in his list, in his to-do list. I'm going to change that to user ID 1, which is my user list, my to-do list, and it gives me the status of everything and the list of what's going on. So straightforward enough. This is essentially how nested, if you've got any nested queries that you're going to do, nested queries with nested fields, this is how you would be looking to resolve that as part of your GraphQL API development. So once again, hopefully this gives you a good sense of just building out queries and writing resolvers and gets you familiar with that process. Trust me, the more you do it, the better you will feel about it, and you can start looking to explore more complex territories where you could potentially consider hooking up a quick MongoDB instance, and that will enable you to get up and running quickly and have a persistent data source in this case. Because right now we are primarily working with queries, which is the read side of things. It's just retrieving information. But when we go into the world of mutations, I think persistent data would probably work a little bit better. But having said that, I will go really quickly into the world of mutations as well, just to give you a really quick sense of what that looks like. So I'm going to go back in here and I'm going to be writing our first mutation. So we've got our type queries. I am going to add to that right on top. I'm going to be saying type mutation. We've got our type mutation here, kind of like how you would write queries. I'm going to say add user. And what it will do is it will need a couple of fields, of course, as you can imagine. You will need a name field with string. Now, I don't want this to be empty, so I'm going to make this required. I would also need an email. My email can be empty, so I'm just going to leave this out. At least I want to have a name of when I'm adding a user, but you can equally make that required as well if you wanted to. I'm not adding anything to my to-do right now. I'm going to keep that blank, as you will see in the resolver. And what I want as a response. Now, there are a couple of ways in which you can handle the response type of this. You can very easily, if you wanted to create a mutation, you can have like a string that gives you back a status. You can create your own object that is going to be a response to this. But what I want to do as the simplest possible way is just return my updated list of users at this point. And I think I'm happy to do that. The other thing to note over here is just quickly, if you see I'm sending in sort of an object of sorts with multiple fields, you can define an input object that essentially does the same thing if you wanted to. So if you wanted to have specific input types, it'll look something like this. You will have your input and you will define that as your add user info, and then you'll go ahead and define these things as well. So I'm going to skip over that for the time being, just to, again, keep things as simple as possible. Mutation done, as you can imagine, next is going to be to write the resolver. So we are going to be not doing queries or users. We are heading straight to mutations now. So mutations, I'm going to be adding user. I think that was it. I think it was called add user. Add user. Yes, that was what it was. So we've got our add user. Now, obviously, we need to get access to the arguments. So we are going to be using the arguments. I don't need the parent this case as well. So I can either say parent, or I can just use an underscore and go straight to my arguments and this. So what next is we need to have, effectively, I'm going to be creating my new user first. So I'm going to be creating this and an ID. ID I want to increment myself. So I'm just going to take my existing ID len, go for name. It's going to be the name that has been passed to me. Then my email. And my to-do list for that, for the time being, I'm just going to keep empty. We'll add things, in the future if you want to. For the time being, we don't need this. That's it. I'm going to add this to my existing user array using push, and then I'm going to be returning my users, my updated users. So hopefully that works.
Be careful about the name of your resolver in line 80. I think it's a mutation. You're using mutation, not mutation.
Yes.
Yeah,
that is correct. That is correct. Thank you so much for picking that up. I think that's what got flagged there. Okay, great. Thank you so much for picking that up. Sorry, I was just seeing red at the bottom, and I think I was just about. I think it's going to tell me the same thing. There you go, mutations at the bottom. So yeah, thank you so much, Agatha, for keeping an eye out for that issue there. But the good part is we have moved past it. The resolver seems to be working. Let's test that out and head over to our playground. We've got our mutation here. I'm going to actually disable my query. I don't think I need this. I'm going to remove this from here. And within my mutation, I'm going to be adding a user. And again, the variables are handled at the bottom. So let's give it a name. I'm going to say Alice. Or let's say alice@gmail.com. All right. And then we're going to be, what do we want back? We want our ID, we want our name, we want our email, and we also want to check out if we have any to-dos. So within this, I don't want anything, just want title. So if everything goes well, this will give me back the updated list of users. And by the looks of it, we've got all of those here. There's actually, Apollo provides a really nice way of looking at it, which is this table view. So it gives me, a little bit more access to visual access to things here. So obviously the new element has been added. There's a new Alice added to this stack, which is great. And with that's sort of a quick introduction to the world of mutations. I'm not going to go too far into this once again, because I think if you just typically restart the server here, you're going to lose this mutation because it's not persistent data. So, it's not going to be long term. You can play around with it while it lasts right now, but it will get overwritten because our original data source does not have this right now. So with that, I think that brings us to the end of sort of our part two. It's gone a little bit longer than I had anticipated. Hopefully we can go through the Tyk segments a little bit faster. I'm going to quickly pop over if there are any questions that you have. I don't see any for the time being, which is hopefully that's a good sign. And hopefully you guys are still here with me, playing around, at least thinking about how you can build your own GraphQL APIs. But again, if you've got questions, let me know. I'm here to answer them. But moving right along, because we are going to be a little short on time by the looks of it. What we want to do next is we want to go into the world of managing these APIs. So as you can imagine, these APIs are available right now, but they are not, I would say, secure per se. I think you can add level of security, which I think Apollo does have to a certain degree, but essentially not the end-to-end management that you would want to have as part of your production-ready GraphQL APIs. So how do we do that? Now, with Tyk, there are a couple of ways in which you can get started with Tyk. There is Tyk Cloud. If you want to get signed up and start trying it, you can do that right away. No license key, nothing really required to do that. But if you're looking to have a local installation of this, or as we call it, the self-managed installation of this, We have what we call the Tyk Pro Docker demo, which uses Docker to get things started for you, get things hosted locally. We also have something called the Tyk demo, which is a little bit, which has a few more elements to it for you to play around with. For today, I'm going to keep things simple and go with my Tyk Pro Docker demo. The steps are all here. I think the key thing that you need to know is, okay, someone asked about subscriptions. Yes, absolutely. That's a very good point. Thank you, Marek. Subscriptions is a really, really exciting thing which comes bundled together with GraphQL. It enables you to work with real-time data, work with streams. Unfortunately, for today, we're going to be skipping that out because once again, it's a thing of its own. We want to give it its own due time and work through them. We've got some really interesting offerings here at Tyk as well. And of course, Apollo manages and is capable of handling subscriptions and helps us build it. But we will have a dedicated section for subscriptions, streams, and how we want to handle those in a future session. So thank you for the question. But for today, I think we're going to be skipping over those because I think it's going to be a little bit too complex for today's discussion. But thank you so much for the question. Okay, this is the Tyk setup. Let me see if I can, so I already have this set up on my end. I'm going to just quickly open it up on my code editor so that you can see what that setup looks like. Let me see, open folder. I'm going to go with my Tyk Pro Docker demo. It's really straightforward for you to set things up. You've got to follow the steps. I'm skipping over for the time being, but let me know if something is not clear. Basically, what you need to do is you need to clone your clone this Git repository, which we might as well clone your Git repository, and then just follow this step. You just need to have this file created, which is your .env file, and have a license key. So I've got my own license key here. You reach out to us, we will set you up with a trial license key if you want to try it out yourself locally, and you add this up. And literally the next step is to Docker compose up. So it sets you up with a Postgres database and gets you up and running really quickly. Obviously, you need to have Docker installed in your local system. If you already have that, simply hit this command and you'll be able to get up and running with it. And once you do have that running for you, let me see if I can get another instance of this so that I can show you what the Docker up looks like. There we go. I think I need to get into my projects, Tyk and Tyk Pro Docker demo. I think this is where I want to be. So let's see into it. Projects, Tyk, Pro Docker demo, and I'm going to do a Docker compose up, and that is going to start my container. It is going to be listening on, I believe it's going to be listening on port 3000 at this point. So once it is all good up and running, I should be able to head on over to my localhost 3000 and it will get started. In your case, if you're starting it up for the very first time, it's going to give you a couple of, it'll ask for a couple of pieces of information that will enable you to bootstrap your Tyk installation, which will be your organization name, your own name, your email ID, and a password that you would want to use to access this dashboard. Equally, it'll automatically take the license key as part of the setup process. So once you do that, once you log in to Tyk, this is the dashboard that you will be seeing. The dashboard will, in your case, it might be a little bit empty because you may not have interacted with it before. Again, don't get alarmed. We are currently using the Tyk 4.3.3 version of things. So this is the latest version that we have out there. So with that, let's head on over. So what we're going to be doing now is we obviously created a GraphQL API. What we want to do next is we want to add this GraphQL API to Tyk, and we want to add a layer of security using an authentication token as part of our API journey so that it is no longer an open API available to every single person making requests. We want it to be available to specific people with the right permissions, with the right access to be able to access this information, access this the APIs that we have created. So with that, let's go over to our APIs. I've got a couple of tests over here, but I'm going to move on over. And as you can see, there are a couple of ways in which you can get started. So there are different types of APIs that you can start off with, your HTTPs, your REST APIs, your gRPCs, the OS version of it, which is again a really exciting thing, probably sometime in the future for another session. But what we're going to be doing is we're going to be looking at an existing GraphQL endpoint. I'm going to be calling it my Apollo demo. And I need my upstream here. So the thing obviously is, and this trumps me up, it's trumped me up a couple of times now. So I'm just going to put this here so that, let's see if you've got this right on your end or not. If I were to just copy paste this here, it is going to throw, I think it's going to be throwing an error because it's not able to proxy. And the reason for that is because you are inside Docker right at this point, and within Docker, you don't have access directly to localhost. What you need to do here is you just need to change that to host.docker.internal. And that should solve that issue for you, I think. Maybe am I doing something wrong here? Am I saying this incorrectly? Maybe it is, the syntax is wrong. Let me see if I can get this. Localhost. Let's see. What do we have? Apollo. Should just be this host.docker.internal 4000. Seems to be having a bit of trouble here. Okay, let me just check to make sure my server is still running. Not having an issue here. Let's see, can I get this up? Nope. Okay. Maybe the server stopped for some reason. Let me see. Can I go back here? I think it's probably the server that stopped. Okay, let's do that. Okie doke. Let's go back out here. Hangout demo. It's up. And I think, yeah, that's what. I think it's because it was running on Visual Studios. So it kind of stopped working. All right. With that, let's see. Let's restart that server. And now, if we go back here and add a new API, Apollo demo, and put in our internal. All right, fine, that works. I think the server just, I knocked out the server when I was switching between the projects. So, well, that would have not happened if you were running the server directly on your own terminal as opposed to the Visual Studio's terminal, but lesson for the future. All right, with that, what I'm going to be doing is going right at the bottom here. You can see the authentication mode. For the sake of simplicity and for step one, I'm going to be changing this out to open keyless and hit save. So this is now created. This essentially added my API to the API gateway, the Tyk API gateway. I'm going to go back in here and I can see the schema that it has already retrieved. So this is as you would imagine, as might be familiar to you. This is stuff that we have recently created ourselves. So this is essentially the schema that we have available. What we want to do next is we're going to go over to our internal playground. And over here, we are going to be creating our query. So let's say we want to get our get user. If you remember, we're going to get user by ID 1. Here, I'm going to be looking at the name. I'm going to be looking at the email. I'm going to be looking at my to-dos. And the to-do will have the title and complete it. And everything goes well, we get back our information. So that is step one completed here in our API management journey. We've got everything added to our GraphQL, our Tyk API gateway. Now, the other way in which you can actually access this is externally. So obviously, this is for those who have access to our internal platform. What you could also do is enable an external playground. And to do that, just scroll down to the section that says Enable API Playground, hit Enable API Playground, and hit Update. So what this will do now is if we go all the way here and look at our API URL, copy that, hit that URL and add playground to the bottom, we will get our own external playground graphical playground to work with. And it's similar to what Apollo was providing to you. It is a slightly simplified version of that. And we can, again, start writing our own queries if we wanted to. You can use the Explorer if you want to get up and running a little bit quickly, quick and easy. Let's say we've got ID 1, and we want our ID, email, and name for now. Let me get rid of this and hit that. There we go. We've got our response here. So external playground available as well if you wanted to. Over on back to our gateway. Now, obviously, the point of this is not just to change URLs and do same things differently, but we want to actually add security here. So let's go diving straight into it. Step 1 of that is going to be changing our authentication mode to authentication token. And immediately when I hit update and go back to my playground, you will see that it's going to disallow me from making the request anymore. You need to have authorization. Now, the way you can do this is through something called policies. What we actually need is actually an API key, as you would be familiar if you work with authentication tokens. But what you kind of want to avoid here is to be creating one-on-one mappings for your APIs. Obviously, with small number of APIs, you can have a per API key available and just work with that. But in larger organizations with greater number of APIs to manage, ideally, you need a more efficient way of doing it, which is where we have policies. Essentially defines or describes the rules of engagement for your APIs inside the security policy. So let's go over and create a new policy. I'm going to call it Apollo Demo. And I'm going to head on over to my configuration, Apollo Demo Policy. And I'm going to set my expiration to, let's say, an hour. I don't need it to be longer than that. I'm going to create that policy. It's all done now. The next step of this is going to be creating a key based off of that policy. And we'll see the benefit of doing this in the next step. So let's go hit add key. So I've got my demo policy here already, which we just created. I'm going to click that, and it's essentially going to be importing all of the rules that are defined within the policy and create an API key based off of that. And I'm going to be hitting create key right now. So with that, I've got my key ID. I'm going to copy this, and I'm going to head back out to my playground, and under my request headers, I'm going to create a new header called authorization, mind the spelling, and add my key. So what it should do now is it's going to give me back my response, which we had previously. And I can go a little bit deeper as well if I wanted to get my to-dos as well, with the title and completed. All of that, it's all accessible now. So layer of security added here. So what else can we do? Let's go back on to our policies. So within policies, let's go back into our Apollo demo policy. And there are, as you can see, there are a couple of different segments here. There are global limits and quotas that you can set, and there are some per API things that you can deal with. So let's start off with query depth. I'll get back to rate limiting really soon, but query depths here, the idea here is that in a lot of cases, you might have nested fields as part of your queries. What that might mean is maybe you've got a user, you've got to-dos, and those to-dos could be associated with users, and those users could be associated with more to-dos. So it could be sort of an infinite, almost infinite cycle, and keep going deeper and deeper. And maybe based off of your use case, maybe that is essential at some point of time, but maybe to a specific depth. What you want to avoid is that someone actually attacking your server based off of this this ability or a capability feature that comes with GraphQL. What we want to do then is we want to limit how deep we can go in. And the way you can look at the depths of it is we start off with the query as your level 1. Then depth level 2 is this one, which is your exact specific query that you're going for. And then you've got the nested ones. There's essentially 3 layers of depths over here. So if we want to limit people to just 2 of them, which will disallow us from using to-dos, it essentially tells me that my depth limit has been exceeded. So if I now get rid of my to-dos, it'll give me back my response because we are only able to make requests up to that level. So it's really, really important, useful, prevents attacks, prevents things from spiraling out of control, because the deeper you go, the more requests go to your servers, and you definitely don't want that, especially when you're working at scale. So that's really good. That is your query depth limits. And obviously you can, if you were to remove that all the way to 1, then you probably don't have the ability to make any requests whatsoever. I'm going to bring that back out. I will get rid of the query depth limit for now. What you can also do is you can set rate limits. Rate limits, essentially what they do is they will enable you to make requests or define how many requests you can make over a period of time. So with that, let's say I want to make only 3 requests or allow 3 requests over a period of 10 seconds. Let's hit update. We are going to be going back out here and it's going to give me a response for sure. But as soon as I hit the 3 limit mark, it's going to end. So this could be part of your, I don't know, monetization strategy, potentially. Quota potentially does the same thing here over a larger period of time. It could be part of your load management strategy. So either way, you've got a way to deal with it now. So another security method available right out of the box, part of Tyk. So you've got that. I'm going to disable that. The next part is looking into field-based permissions. Now, imagine if you've got specific fields that you don't want to be accessible by your users with specific keys, and you can do that per policy. You can have separate policies with separate access rules that you want to set up. So for that, I'm going to be hitting field-based permissions, and you can see all of my different fields and both types and fields are available here. So if I want, I can disallow mutations altogether for a specific kind of user with a specific key. What I can also do is I can go specifically into what I want to disable, and maybe I don't want users to look at my email or have access to that. So I'm going to hit update, and I'm going to be going onto my playground. And when I make this request now, it's going to say messages restricted. So I will have to get rid of that before I can get back my response. So if I don't want to allow it, it's going to enable me to have that degree of control as well. So with that, I think that comes to an end of how you can manage your existing GraphQL endpoints, how you can expose that, how you can enable people to play with it as part of your API playground, which is great. On to the bonus content, because we really don't have much time left, but hopefully you'll stay around because it's really exciting stuff. And I'm jumping onto the next one. Once again, if you've got questions, feel free to add that to the question section. Now, imagine that instead of having built your own GraphQL API, as we did for the first hour or so for today, we had something like a REST endpoint that we had that already existed. And a good example of that is if you go over to jsonplaceholder.typico.com, they have some of these different APIs that you can play around. These are REST APIs that you can play with. I'm going to be looking at 2, which might seem quite familiar to you, which is the users and the to-dos. So with the users, we will have, yes.
Sorry, I wanted just to add something to the policies you were just, so it's not yet visible in version 4.3.3. It will be, right. It's underneath, but there is also an option as part of your security strategy. There is also an option to disallow your users from introspecting your graph. So yeah. It's underneath in your version. It's just with the API, so I don't think we have time to set all of that up. But it's going to be available on the dashboard within a month. So yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for this. Interesting enough, I think I was a developer a couple of weeks ago, and there was a question around introspection and its importance from a security standpoint. So it is a challenge from a security perspective, because introspection basically gives you the schema of your entire GraphQL API, and you may not want to make that available for people. So restriction of your introspection and who can have access to that is very, very important as well. And that's something that we have introduced as part of our Tyk 4.3 capability. It will be a little bit easier to access as we go along through our dashboard. It is already available if you are using command line directly. So we obviously don't have time, unfortunately, for today to do that. So I'm skipping over it, heading on over to our universal data graph. So thank you so much for bringing that up, Agatha. It's very important as well to know from a security standpoint. Over to what we have. So REST endpoints, 2 of them that we're going to be using. We've got a list of users, very similar to what we have been working with so far, but obviously a few more fields defined over here. We can skip most of them. We're going to be using only the ones that we've been working with so far, which is our ID, name, and email, which is over here. And then the other thing that you can do with this is that you can, if you wanted to access a specific user, you just say ID, and you can access information about a specific user, which is again great, kind of what we have been also trying to do with our get user by ID. But equally, for a specific user, you can go in and get a list of to-dos. Again, very familiar perhaps to what we have been doing. And it's a whole list of to-dos, similar shape, user ID, ID title, and complete status. So what we're going to be doing is these are all REST APIs, and they are disjointed REST APIs at this point of time. And we want to be able to query a user, get information about that user, and have the associated to-do list all made available as one single unified graph, which is what we're going to be doing right now without any middleware. So over to our Tyk dashboard really quickly. I'm going to head back out here to my APIs and add new API. This time I'm going to be using UDG. So let's say user external, or let's say external user. User to do. And in here, I'm going to hit configure. So once again, I'm going to be just disallowing the make it keyless and hit save. So my API is here. Now, onto my schema. So what we want to do now is we want to start creating our APIs, sort of mapping out the REST API to our schema, the GraphQL schema that we want. So now you can drop different fields if you wanted to, but equally you can drop fields if you wanted to, or use all of it if you wanted to. But for now, we're just going to be using a subset of it. So starting yet again with the queries, let's say we want to do get users, or maybe in this case, we just want to do get user. I'm going to say ID int. This is going to give me back my user. I obviously need to define my type user, and my user will have an ID type. It will also have a name string. It will have an email string, and I think that's all I need for the time being. So just to get us up and running with our first data source. On the right-hand side, as you can see, we can define our data source already. So right now, I just want to make sure that our get user is getting the right information. We can also have our second one, which is get all users, which, if you remember, gave us a list of users. There you go. So we've got a list of users here. So let's start off with that one first.
I have a proposal, Budha, for you. Just in the type user, let's add maybe phone, just so that we are not cheating that it's the same.
Oh yeah. Okay.
application.
Let me see.
Yeah.
Let me see what we've got. We've got a. Let me quickly see.
Yeah, there's a phone or a website.
Oh, that's phone. All right. There's a website here. Let's go with website. I think yeah. Fair enough. Fair enough. No cheating. No cheating.
Yeah, exactly. That it's something else.
Got it. Absolutely.
Yeah, you have to click. You have to click the icon, the I on the left-hand side.
Got it.
Yeah.
Yes.
And now you can extend
the
user type.
Let's do this as a website.
Exactly, and that's also a string.
String. There you go. Perfect. Yeah, good point. Let's get our all users data source sorted. And as you can see, there are a couple of ways in which you can do this. There is REST, GraphQL, and Kafka, something for the future, as it's a capability we brought in as part of our recent releases. We'll go diving into that in the future. But for now, let's go with REST. My data source, I can name that. I'm going to call it ext users. The URL for this, if I go back now, will be just this. Great. And my method is going to be a get method. I'm going to hit save. And that is going to give me, I think it should, if I hit update now, I've got this. I wonder if it's going to allow me to just make that query really quickly, just so that we can get all users. And it will give me name, email, and our new addition to the field, which is website. Okay, we've got all of this. We've got our users. I think we can actually add in ID as well to see that we've got about 10 IDs working right now. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 9, 10, which is great. On to the second part of the setup. Let's go into the next one, which is our get user, where we are looking at a specific user based off of ID. We're going to go back to our REST once again. Let's say ext user. In this case, I will go back here. I can use the same thing, but imagine now we need something that's a little bit more dynamic in nature. So with that, in order to do that, I don't want to hard code the ID, which is going to be 1 or 2, which is going to give me back the same response every single time. I'm going to be taking up the ID argument that came as part of the query itself. So that gives me the get method. I'm going to hit save and I'll hit update. So if I go back to my playground and make a query to get a user instead of users, I will need my ID, which will, let's start off with 3, usually start off with 1, and it will give me the ID 3. So once again, what's happening under the hood here is we have actually transformed the REST API into a GraphQL API and made that available in absolutely no time whatsoever. So, and without having to code anything, without any middleware, without any real need to know what is happening and how to write resolvers, all of that stuff. You don't need to do any of it. It's all done through this interface straight away, and it's ready to go for you. Now, we don't want to stop right here. We want to add one more data source here as we did with the previous one, which was the to-dos. So let's go back here inside our schema. I'm going to be defining yet another type, which is going to be my to-do type. And it's going to have my ID once again. It's going to have my user ID as well. And I will have a name. Sorry, not name. I think it's title. Sorry, my bad. Title. String and completed, which is going to be Boolean. Okay, I think there's something wrong. Yeah, and small, we don't want that. And now as part of my user, I'm going to be adding my to-dos, which is going to be type to-do. So now, as you can see, it's already been added here. So I'm going to go straight to defining the data source. Once again, I head on over to my REST. I'm going to call it my user to do external or user to do. I'm going to call my URL, which in this case, actually, if you look at the shape of it, we've got user / the user ID, and then the to-dos comes in. So I'm going to start off with the users, and we'll go from there. Let's do that. So let's go over to the URL. We've got our, mess that up a little bit. I'm going to add this here. Let's do our parameter, which is going to be the ID of the user and to-dos. So it's also going to be get. We're going to be hitting save, hit update. And when I head on over to my playground now, I can add my to-dos. And within this, I can add my title and complete it. And there you have it. You've got your user ID 3 with all the associated the to-dos that are associated with this particular user. And you've got it. You've essentially mapped out 2 REST endpoints, nested them together, brought it all together in this interface and expose it. And of course, we don't stop here as well. Everything that you saw from the security standpoint, creating field-based permissions, rate limiting, policies, authentication tokens, query depth limits, all of that, stopping introspection queries, disallowing them, all of that is possible from this interface. You can obviously expose this out as a playground, just like we did previously. Just enable the playground, hit update. And if you look at the API URL over here, go on to playground, and you'll still be able to interact with it right here. So for external users, this is how you would be looking to expose this and make it available. So I'm going to stop here. I know we are over time by about 10 minutes, but I think it was important, exciting thing for you to know this a little bit more, and hopefully you found a little bit of value from this. Again, the recording of this is going to be available If you've got specific questions around this, definitely feel free to reach out to us. We'll be doing more of these sessions in the future. We'll be looking to explore a full end-to-end CRUD application using MongoDB, Apollo, Tyk, and perhaps React. We'll be exploring how the same stack might work with, say, Zura and Tyk as well. So there's a lot to explore in the future. But for the time being, hopefully this gave you a good sense of how you can start building your GraphQL APIs, managing it with Tyk, and exposing that for external consumption together. So that is it. That is my end of marathon for now. Is there anything that anyone wants to ask? Any questions from anybody? Anything that you're excited about? Anything that you found valuable, perhaps, or did not agree with anything that I said, or tried and had issues? Okay, I will take that silence and lack of Q&A as hopefully a positive thing that you were able to follow along to some extent. If you miss something, of course, the recording of this will be available to be sharing with everyone who's registered for this event. It should be available on YouTube as well if you want to play along with it. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Agatha, as well. Agatha, anything else to add as we reach the end of the session?
Yes, I will add just one thing. So we have there is a public repository on our Tyk Technologies GitHub called Tyk-examples, where you can actually go and if you want to try it out, but you're not entirely sure how to build your own data graph, how to build your own universal data graph, there are ready to go API configurations over there. And you can just copy and paste them into the dashboard, and there will be a real life working GraphQL with REST underneath. Sometimes REST, sometimes GraphQL as well, because we can stitch different sources. So yeah.
That's awesome. I thought I'll just show you what that looks like. So if you go here, if you just search for Tyk Technologies on GitHub, and inside just look for Tyk examples, you will get a whole repository of things that you can do here. Copy paste it, try it out for yourself, and once again, let us know what you think. There is an entire UDG folder. Again, try it out for yourself. And thank you so much, Agatha, for bringing that out. I completely missed out on that one.
No worries.
Great. Okay. With that, that brings us to the end of the 51st edition of the GraphQL Hangout. Hopefully, this was a slightly new format that we were trying out because I think we wanted you to have the ability to actually do things yourself as well, to see how actually building out a GraphQL API looks like, what adding security and a gateway and all of that as part of the stack would look like. So hopefully these 90 to 100 minutes that you pretty much spent with us here was valuable. We look forward to your feedback. We look forward to you trying it out and telling us what you thought about it. If you found something more interesting, a different way of handling it, definitely feel free to reach out to us. We would love to have you on and share your experiences. And we'll be bringing up more exciting new conversational topics and demos over the course of the year with the GraphQL Hangout. So with that, thank you so much for joining. This is Budha signing off. Thank you so much, Agatha, for all of your support and inputs throughout the demo. It was really, really valuable. Thank you so much. And until next time, take care and see you later.
Bye.